Let me tell you a story that will shatter your heart. A glimpse into a world of gilded cages and broken spirits. A tale of beauty, betrayal, and the crushing weight of expectation. This is the tragic life of Theron, a male concubine in ancient Greece. Theron remembered the day his father sold him as if it were a brand, seared onto his very soul. He had been barely 15 summers old, a boy blossoming into a captivating youth, his features sculpted with the grace of a young god, his hair the color of spun gold catching the Aegean sun. It was his beauty, a cruel and fickle gift, that sealed his fate. His father, a struggling fisherman burdened by debt and a growing family, saw in Theron's exquisite features an opportunity, a chance to escape the relentless grip of poverty. Theron, innocent and naive, dreamt of sailing the seas like his father, of wrestling with the other boys in the village square, of a life filled with honest labor and simple joys. He had no inkling of the darkness that awaited him. The trader, a portly man with greedy eyes that lingered on Theron's slender frame, arrived in a lavishly decorated litter carried by 4 muscular slaves. He spoke of riches, of silks and perfumes, of a life of ease and comfort. He painted a picture of a world far removed from the dusty streets of their small village. A world where Theron would be pampered and adored. His father, his face etched with a mixture of guilt and hope, nodded silently, accepting the bag of silver coins offered in exchange for his son. Theron, confused and frightened, clung to his mother's hand, but her grip was weak, her eyes filled with tears she could not shed. She knew, better than he did, the true nature of the bargain. He was taken away, not in a grand litter as promised, but crammed into the back of a rough cart, jostled alongside other young men, their faces a mixture of fear and resignation. The journey to Athens was long and arduous, the landscape blurring past in a haze of dust and despair. He tried to speak to the others, to find some comfort in their shared plight, but they remained silent, their eyes fixed on some distant point, their spirits already broken. He learned quickly that hope was a dangerous commodity in this new world, a luxury he could no longer afford. Upon arrival in Athens, he was taken to a bustling marketplace, a cacophony of sights and sounds that overwhelmed his senses. He was stripped bare, his body examined and prodded by a succession of wealthy men, their eyes cold and calculating. He felt like a piece of meat, an object to be bought and sold, his dignity stripped away with his clothes. He saw his reflection in a polished bronze shield, a terrified boy, his eyes wide with fear, his skin pale with apprehension. He barely recognized himself. Finally, he was purchased by Lord Philemon, a renowned scholar and philosopher, a man known for his sharp intellect and his even sharper tongue. Philemon was older, his face lined with years of study and contemplation, his eyes piercing and intelligent. He was not unkind, but he was distant, detached, as if observing Theron from a great distance. He saw in Theron not a person, but an object of beauty, a living work of art to be admired and displayed. He was taken to Philemon's villa, a sprawling estate overlooking the Aegean Sea. He was given fine clothes, fed exquisite food, and bathed in scented oils. He was taught to read and write, to play the lyre, to dance with grace and elegance. He was surrounded by luxury, but he was still a prisoner, his every move dictated by Philemon's whims. He was a bird in a gilded cage, his wings clipped, his spirit slowly dying. He learned to smile when he was sad, to laugh when he was bored, to feign pleasure when he felt nothing but emptiness. He became a master of deception, hiding his true feelings behind a mask of beauty and compliance. He was Theron, the beautiful concubine, the pride of Philemon's household, but inside he was still the frightened boy from the small fishing village, lost and alone in a world he could never understand. He longed for the smell of the sea, the feel of the sun on his skin, the simple joys of his former life. But those memories were fading, replaced by the cold reality of his gilded cage. He was trapped, and there was no escape. His beauty, the very thing that had condemned him, was now his only weapon, his only means of survival. He would use it, manipulate it, until it broke him completely. He was determined to survive, even if it meant sacrificing his soul. He would become the perfect concubine, the epitome of beauty and grace, and in doing so he would slowly unravel the man who held him captive. This was his plan, his secret rebellion, the only thing that kept him from succumbing to despair. He would bide his time, observe and wait for his opportunity. He would not be broken easily. He was Theron, and he was a survivor. Life in Philemon's villa was a strange and unsettling mix of luxury and oppression. Theron was treated with a certain level of respect, even affection, but he was always aware of the underlying power dynamic. He was a possession, an object of desire, not a person with his own thoughts and feelings. He learned to navigate this complex world with a delicate balance of charm and subservience, anticipating Philemon's moods and desires, always careful not to overstep his boundaries. He was a serpent in the garden, beautiful and alluring on the surface, but with a hidden venom waiting to strike. Philemon, despite his scholarly pursuits, was a man of unpredictable temperament. He could be kind and generous one moment, and cruel and demanding the next. He often subjected Theron to long, rambling lectures on philosophy and politics, testing his knowledge and challenging his intellect. Theron, surprisingly, found himself drawn to these intellectual debates. He possessed a sharp mind, hidden beneath his beautiful exterior, and he relished the opportunity to engage with Philemon on a deeper level. He began to read voraciously, devouring the works of Plato and Aristotle, challenging Philemon's interpretations and offering his own insights. He discovered a passion for learning, a thirst for knowledge that transcended his physical captivity. However, these intellectual pursuits were often overshadowed by Philemon's more carnal desires. He treated Theron as a plaything, an object of sensual pleasure, demanding his constant attention and affection. Theron learned to detach himself emotionally from these encounters, viewing them as a necessary evil, a price he had to pay for his survival. He perfected the art of feigned pleasure, masking his true feelings behind a facade of desire. He became a skilled actor, playing the role of the devoted concubine, while secretly plotting his revenge. He observed Philemon closely, studying his habits, his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. He discovered that Philemon was deeply insecure, plagued by self-doubt and a fear of aging. He was obsessed with his legacy, desperate to be remembered as a great philosopher. Theron realized that he could use these insecurities to his advantage. He began to subtly manipulate Philemon, flattering his ego, praising his intellect, and catering to his every whim. He became Philemon's confidant, his closest advisor, the only person he truly trusted. He also began to cultivate relationships with the other members of the household, the slaves, the servants, the other concubines. He learned their secrets, their grievances, their desires. He discovered a network of discontent simmering beneath the surface of Philemon's seemingly perfect household. He saw an opportunity to exploit this discontent, to use it to his advantage. He began to subtly sow seeds of rebellion, encouraging the slaves to demand better treatment, whispering doubts into the ears of the other concubines. He became a catalyst for change, a force for disruption in Philemon's carefully constructed world. Among the other concubines, he found an unlikely ally in Lysander, a young man with a sharp wit and a rebellious spirit. Lysander was older than Theron, and he had been in Philemon's service for many years. He had witnessed firsthand Philemon's cruelty and his capriciousness, and he harbored a deep resentment towards him. Lysander saw in Theron a kindred spirit, someone who understood the true nature of their captivity. He became Theron's mentor, teaching him the intricacies of the household, the unspoken rules, the hidden pathways to power. Together they formed a formidable alliance, plotting their escape from Philemon's clutches. Their plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They intended to poison Philemon, frame his death as an accident, and then flee Athens with as much of his wealth as they could carry. It was a risky plan, fraught with danger, but they were both desperate. They had nothing to lose. They spent months gathering the necessary ingredients for the poison, stealing small amounts from Philemon's personal apothecary. They practiced their alibis, perfecting their roles as grieving lovers. They meticulously planned every detail, leaving nothing to chance. The night of the murder arrived, cloaked in darkness and anticipation. Theron prepared Philemon's nightly wine, carefully adding the poison to the goblet. He watched as Philemon drank it down, his eyes closing in contentment. He felt a pang of guilt, a fleeting moment of regret, but he quickly suppressed it. He reminded himself of all the suffering Philemon had inflicted upon him, of all the dreams he had stolen. He watched as Philemon's body began to convulse, his face contorting in agony. He felt a surge of satisfaction, a sense of justice finally being served, but their plan was not foolproof. As Philemon lay dying, he gasped out a name that sent a chill down Theron's spine. He called out for Althea, his daughter from a previous marriage, a woman who had been living in the shadows of the villa, observing everything with a keen and discerning eye. Althea had always been suspicious of Theron, and she had witnessed his growing influence over her father. She had seen the subtle manipulations, the carefully crafted lies. She knew that he was plotting something, and she had been waiting for him to make his move. As Philemon's last breath escaped his lips, Althea appeared, her eyes filled with rage and suspicion. The game was not over. It had only just begun. The serpent in the garden had struck, but the garden had defenses of its own. Althea, a woman hardened by years of living in her father's shadow, was not easily fooled. Unlike the other inhabitants of the villa, she saw Theron not as a beautiful object, but as a calculating manipulator, a threat to her own position and inheritance. The moment she heard her father's dying breath, she knew that Theron was responsible. Her grief was quickly replaced by a cold, burning rage, a determination to avenge her father's death and expose Theron for the monster he was. She immediately raised the alarm, summoning the guards and accusing Theron of murder. Theron and Lysander, caught off guard, tried to maintain their composure, playing the part of grieving lovers. But Althea was relentless, her accusations fueled by years of resentment and a deep understanding of her father's character. She pointed out the subtle inconsistencies in their stories, the suspicious circumstances surrounding Philemon's death. She demanded a thorough investigation, insisting that Theron and Lysander be held in custody until the truth could be uncovered. The guards, loyal to Althea and suspicious of Theron's growing influence over Philemon, readily complied. Theron and Lysander were dragged away, their protests ignored, their carefully constructed alibis crumbling around them. They were thrown into a dark, damp cell, their hopes of escape dashed. The weight of their impending doom settled upon them like a shroud. Althea wasted no time in gathering evidence against them. She interrogated the slaves and servants, piecing together the puzzle of Theron's manipulations. She discovered his secret meetings with Lysander, his pilfering of ingredients from the apothecary, his subtle attempts to sow discord within the household. She found witnesses who claimed to have seen Theron acting suspiciously in the hours leading up to Philemon's death. The evidence mounted against him, painting a damning picture of a cold-blooded murderer. Theron, desperate to save himself, tried to reason with Althea, to appeal to her sense of justice. He claimed that he had been manipulated by Lysander, that he had been an unwilling participant in the plot. He pleaded with her to believe him, to see the innocence that he claimed still resided within him. But Althea was unmoved. She saw through his lies, recognizing the cunning and ambition that lay beneath his beautiful facade. She refused to be swayed by his charms, determined to see him brought to justice. Lysander, resigned to his fate, refused to cooperate with Althea. He remained defiant, protecting Theron and accepting his own responsibility for Philemon's death. He claimed that Theron had been forced to participate, that he had been a victim of Philemon's cruelty, just like himself. He urged Althea to show mercy, to understand the desperation that had driven them to commit such a heinous act. But Althea was deaf to his pleas. She saw him as an accomplice, a co-conspirator, equally deserving of punishment. As the investigation progressed, Althea uncovered a deeper truth about her father's life, a truth that shattered her perception of him and fueled her desire for revenge. She discovered that Philemon had been involved in a secret society, a group of wealthy aristocrats who engaged in decadent and perverse activities. She learned that Theron had been forced to participate in these activities, that he had been subjected to unspeakable abuse and humiliation. She realized that her father had been a monster, and that Theron had been his victim. This revelation did not soften her resolve to punish Theron, but it did complicate her feelings towards him. She began to see him not just as a murderer, but as a product of her father's depravity. She recognized the pain and suffering that he had endured, the scars that he carried beneath his beautiful exterior. She found herself drawn to him, despite her better judgment, a strange and unsettling mixture of pity and revulsion. She visited Theron in his cell, offering him a chance to confess, to reveal the full extent of her father's crimes. She promised him leniency, a chance to escape the city and start a new life, if he would cooperate with her. But Theron refused. He was bound by a code of silence, a loyalty to the other members of the secret society, a fear of the consequences of betraying them. He refused to implicate anyone else, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Althea, frustrated and conflicted, was left with no choice but to proceed with the trial. The evidence was overwhelming, the public outcry was deafening, and her own reputation was at stake. She had to prove that she was capable of upholding justice, of protecting the honor of her family. She prepared to present her case before the Athenian court, knowing that the fate of Theron and Lysander rested in her hands. She stood before the judges, her voice trembling with emotion, and accused Theron and Lysander of the murder of her father, Lord Philemon. The crowd roared its approval, demanding swift and decisive justice. Theron and Lysander stood silent, their faces pale and resigned. The trial had begun, and their fate was sealed. The trial of Theron and Lysander was a spectacle, a public drama played out before the eyes of the entire city. The Athenian court was packed with citizens, eager to witness the downfall of the beautiful concubine and his accomplice. Althea, as the prosecutor, presented a compelling case, weaving together the evidence she had gathered, painting a picture of Theron as a cunning and manipulative murderer. She highlighted his growing influence over Philemon, his secret meetings with Lysander, his access to the poison that had ended Philemon's life. She appealed to the jury's sense of justice, urging them to avenge the death of a respected philosopher and scholar. Theron, defending himself, argued that he was innocent, that he had been manipulated by Lysander and forced to participate in the plot. He portrayed himself as a victim of Philemon's cruelty, a prisoner trapped in a gilded cage, desperate to escape. He spoke of the abuse he had suffered, the humiliation he had endured, the dreams that had been stolen from him. He appealed to the jury's sense of compassion, hoping to sway them with his beauty and his eloquence. Lysander, unwavering in his loyalty to Theron, testified that he alone was responsible for Philemon's death. He claimed that Theron had been forced to participate, that he had been an unwilling accomplice, a pawn in Lysander's game. He begged the jury to spare Theron's life, arguing that he was innocent of any wrongdoing. He accepted his own fate, willing to sacrifice himself to save the man he loved. The trial was a battle of wits, a clash of ideologies, a struggle for survival. Althea presented witness after witness, each offering damning evidence against Theron and Lysander. Slaves testified to their secret meetings, servants revealed their suspicions, and even some of the other concubines spoke of Theron's growing ambition and his desire for power. Theron, in turn, challenged the credibility of the witnesses, exposing their biases and inconsistencies. He pointed out their motivations, their grudges, their personal agendas. He argued that they were all lying, that they were all part of a conspiracy to frame him for a crime he did not commit. The jury, composed of Athenian citizens, listened intently to the arguments, weighing the evidence and trying to discern the truth. They were divided in their opinions, some swayed by Althea's passionate accusations, others moved by Theron's desperate pleas. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. As the trial drew to a close, Althea delivered a powerful closing statement, reminding the jury of the gravity of the crime and the importance of upholding justice. She argued that Theron and Lysander were a threat to Athenian society, that they had betrayed the trust of their master and violated the sacred laws of hospitality. She urged the jury to condemn them to death, to send a message that such acts of treachery would not be tolerated. Theron, in his final plea, spoke from the heart, baring his soul to the jury. He admitted that he had made mistakes, that he had been driven by ambition and a desire for revenge. But he insisted that he was not a murderer, that he had never intended to harm Philemon. He pleaded with the jury to show mercy, to give him a second chance, to allow him to live a life of redemption. The jury retired to deliberate, leaving Theron and Lysander to await their fate. The hours passed slowly, each one feeling like an eternity. Theron and Lysander sat in silence, holding hands, their eyes fixed on the ground, their hearts filled with dread. Finally, the jury returned, their faces grim. The foreman announced the verdict. Lysander was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Theron was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, but the jury was divided on the question of whether he should be sentenced to death. After further deliberation, they reached a compromise. Theron would be banished from Athens for life. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. Althea was satisfied that justice had been served, but she felt a pang of regret for Theron's fate. She knew that banishment was a harsh punishment, condemning him to a life of exile and loneliness. Theron, relieved to have escaped the death penalty, was nonetheless devastated by the prospect of leaving Athens, the only home he had known for the past few years. Lysander, accepting his fate with stoicism, embraced Theron and whispered words of comfort and encouragement. As Lysander was led away to his execution, Theron was escorted out of the city gates, his head bowed in shame. He turned back one last time, looking at the city that had both captivated and condemned him. He felt a surge of bitterness, a sense of injustice, but also a flicker of hope. He was alive, and he had a chance to start anew, to build a better life for himself. He vowed to never forget the lessons he had learned in Athens, the pain he had endured, the love he had found. He would carry those memories with him as he embarked on his journey into the unknown. He turned away from the city and walked towards the horizon, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. His tragic life in Athens had come to an end, but his story was far from over. Theron, banished from Athens, found himself adrift in a world he barely understood. He wandered from city to city, seeking refuge, searching for a place where he could belong. He was a pariah, marked by his past, haunted by the memory of Philemon and Lysander. He tried to reinvent himself, to shed the skin of the beautiful concubine and become someone new. He changed his name, cut his hair, and adopted a rougher, more masculine demeanor. He sought work as a laborer, a sailor, a soldier, anything to escape the shadow of his former life. But his beauty, the very thing that had condemned him, continued to be both a blessing and a curse. It attracted attention, both positive and negative. Some people were drawn to his charm and his grace, while others were suspicious of his motives, wary of his past. He learned to be cautious, to trust no one, to keep his true identity hidden. He traveled to Sparta, hoping to find solace in the disciplined and austere society. He admired the Spartan warriors, their strength, their courage, their unwavering loyalty to their city. He tried to emulate their virtues, but he found himself unable to fully embrace their rigid code of conduct. He was too sensitive, too emotional, too accustomed to luxury and comfort. He then journeyed to Corinth, a bustling port city known for its wealth and its decadence. He found work as a dancer in a local tavern, using his beauty and his grace to earn a living. He attracted a following of admirers, both men and women, who were captivated by his performances. He found a temporary sense of belonging, a fleeting moment of joy, but he knew that this life was not sustainable. He was still running from his past, still hiding from his true self. One day, while performing in the tavern, he caught the eye of a wealthy merchant named Damon. Damon was a kind and compassionate man who saw beyond Theron's beauty and recognized his pain and his loneliness. He offered Theron a job as his personal assistant, promising him a stable income and a safe haven. Theron, hesitant at first, eventually accepted Damon's offer. Working for Damon, Theron found a sense of purpose and stability that he had never known before. Damon treated him with respect and kindness, valuing his intelligence and his skills. He entrusted Theron with important responsibilities, allowing him to manage his business affairs and travel with him on his trading expeditions. As Theron spent more time with Damon, he began to develop feelings for him. He was drawn to Damon's generosity, his wisdom, and his unwavering sense of justice. He saw in Damon a kindred spirit, someone who understood his struggles and accepted him for who he was. Damon, in turn, was drawn to Theron's beauty, his intelligence, and his gentle nature. He recognized the pain that Theron carried within him and wanted to help him heal. He admired Theron's resilience, his ability to overcome adversity, his determination to build a better life for himself. Their relationship blossomed into a deep and abiding love. They found solace in each other's company, sharing their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. They built a life together based on mutual respect, trust, and affection. Theron finally found redemption, not in escaping his past, but in embracing it. He realized that his experiences in Athens had shaped him, had made him who he was. He learned to accept his beauty, not as a curse, but as a gift, something that could be used for good. He used his charm and his eloquence to advocate for the oppressed, to speak out against injustice, to help those in need. He never forgot Lysander, the man who had sacrificed himself to save him. He honored his memory by living a life of purpose and integrity. He established a foundation in Lysander's name, providing support for young men who had been exploited and abused. Theron's story, the tragic life of a male concubine in ancient Greece, became a legend, a tale of beauty, betrayal, and redemption. He was remembered not as a victim, but as a survivor, a symbol of hope for those who had suffered and lost their way. He lived a long and fulfilling life, surrounded by love and respect. He died peacefully in Damon's arms, his heart filled with gratitude and contentment. His legacy lived on, inspiring generations to come. His tale was whispered in taverns, sung in ballads, and etched into the very stones of the cities he had wandered. From the depths of despair he had risen, not as a king or a conqueror, but as a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can still prevail. Shin Chao Kui Vi, remember Theron, for in his tragedy we find a spark of light. End story. End story. End story. End story.